I recently came to the conclusion that I'm a loser. I took it surprisingly well. I was actually very proud of myself. You see, I found out that I don't perform exceedingly well in any of the classic subject areas. I'm not very athletic, and when I do try to play sports, I look like one of the giant blow-up dummies outside of a car dealership. In academics, I perform well enough to explain my social awkwardness, but not well enough to be at the top of my class. I can't sing, I dance worse than I play sports, and the most embarrassing thing about me is that I am terrible at video games. I'm a slightly nerdy, unathletic, awkward noob with the dancing skills of someone who has 3 left feet, or more simply put, a loser. Today, we are often surrounded by competition, and not just in academics and athletics. We also compete in popularity. Fascinated by the competitive spirit, I turn to the wondrously profound UrbanDictionary.com. Here, the word competition is defined as the breakfast of champions. I wasn't satisfied by this definition. So I turned to the Oxford English Dictionary, despite the fact that they added the words twerk and YOLO to their list. In this database, the word competitive is defined as having or displaying a strong desire to be more successful than others. This led me to question how much of this competitive nature is truly greedy, and perhaps more of a desire not to lose. How much do we care about being better than others, especially in our teenage years? And how can this impact people or losers like me, often individuals who are just seeking a place to fit in? In order to answer these slew of questions, we must first take a look at when our competitive nature first develops. Second, we'll investigate the impact of the negativity of our competitive nature. And thirdly, discover how we can overcome and change our competitive attitude, especially when we lose. So, when does our competitive attitude really start? According to Dr. Andrew Myers, the professor in psychology at the University of Memphis, kids first begin to feel competitive at around the age of 5. Prior to this age, if a kid wants to feel good about him or herself, they simply use their imagination. For example, imagining that they're strong enough to lift a car. Now, this doesn't altogether stop at the age of 5, considering I still like to imagine that my flailing moves don't ruin school dances, but it is at this age that 5-year-olds begin to realize what they can do and what they can't. Dr. Myers says the age of 5 is when kids begin to develop at more drastically different speeds, growing taller or learning how to tie their shoes. Also, kids, because they are more aware of what they can't, see other kids who are succeeding at something at which they failed, and they desire not to feel left behind. This is a naturally occurring instinct, as human beings don't want to be the odd one out, and it only continues as we grow up. We focus on something cool, then compete with our classmates to do that popular thing. For example, a few years ago, the most ridiculous thing became insanely popular. Silly bands. Vividly colored rubber bands shaped like animals, TV characters, and food items lined the arms of tweens as far as the eye could see. Kids compared each other to see who had more of what variety and color. Now, maybe no friendships were ruined by these silly bands, but it still shows that kids were willing to change their entire wardrobe and spend a lot of time and money, all for a simple, passing, stupid fad. Now, initially, this competitive attitude is healthy. It's good for the little twerps to learn to stop picking their nose and start tying their shoes. So then, from where does the negativity come? For the most part, it's in middle and high school, when we begin to grow towards adulthood. Kids begin to focus more on popularity as their competitive spirit, as I began to mention more with the silly bands. And as a loser, I know a little bit about this. In our wondrous age of technology, we have an increasing exposure to the media. The television and the internet give us a distinct message about what the cool thing is, and more importantly, what it's not. From the moment kids enter school, they are bombarded with questions about their social life, like, hey man, did you catch the most recent episode of Orange is the New House of Cards? Or, hey, did you watch that sporting event? At the end, one team had accumulated more points than the other. Or even, hey, have you heard the new NSYNC song? I'm not trying to further incriminate myself as a loser. This is just who I am. Remember that whole desiring not to be left behind thing? Yeah, that's not just for 5-year-olds. For some of us, it is hard to find the time to compete with this popularity. We find ourselves devoting more time to other subjects. Making the decision to compete with others in these fads may lead to harm in other fields. Dr. Lawyer Schlesinger studied the impact of social media in the family dynamic. She found that replacing family conversations with watching television, going on the internet, playing video games, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, Google, Bing, blogs, or whatever else kids are into, can be harmful for this dynamic. Now, these things may help our social status, but unfortunately, they can hurt us in other areas. For example, Snapchat is a common form of social media in which kids send each other selfies that erase themselves after 10 seconds. But it's not all fun and games. Dr. Pamela Rudeberger found something interesting, and she published it in the article Psychology Today. She found that an increase in kids taking selfies can lead to an increase in narcissism and suicidal tendencies. It is here that we can see the most severe point of our competitive popularity. Some kids are willing to push themselves so far that they only grow more self-conscious and even begin to feel a lack of self-worth. Are we really willing to do this to ourselves? So, how can we find a solution? Well, admittedly, these things are fun to use. Apps and sites are a great way of communicating with each other. So, for starters, we should look at popularity like we do any of our other extracurriculars, as a competition. So, keeping this in mind, I turned to a place I knew could help me, WikiHow. Here I found a list of steps concerning how we can overcome our competitive spirit. The first step is to find why we are so competitive. We often compete for popularity because we want the glamour with which it is associated. Ever notice how popularity seems to be decided by prioritizing different contests? Athletes seem to be the common mold for popularity, so how often are athletes competing for peer recognition rather than physical health, even without their own knowledge, subconsciously? On top of this, student government elections are often called popularity contests. Who wouldn't want to be able to add influential in student body and had a lot of friends to their resume? In just one bullet point, too. So the next step is acknowledging the facts of the things we have already accomplished. Acknowledging the things we have already accomplished. We compare ourselves to everyone else so often that we don't realize that our own actions are accomplishments themselves. However, we cannot forget that although we fail sometimes and others succeed, that we still have made an accomplishment in ourselves. In the words of Qui-Gon Jinn from Star Wars, there's always a bigger fish, which roughly translates to, we're all losers, which is kind of beautiful when you think about it. That person that you look up to and find athletic, popular, beautiful, muscular, is a loser, which is a humbling experience. And when we humble each other, we level our playing field. Yes, I'm a loser. I'm not a brainiac, I'm not a musician, I'm not an athlete. And sometimes this hurts. However, I'm learning to cope with myself as a loser, because I'm still figuring out who I am. And if I find out that I don't like Orange is the New House of Cards, although I hear Walter White is incredible, I can find solace in the fact that, well, you're all losers too. Thank you.